Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what part of the world you're coming from. I think Savio and I just finally synced up in terms of time zone because you're on the East Coast, I'm on the West Coast, but it's 12 noon here now. So glad to be here for those that are watching on replay or joining us live. If you are joining us live, of course, feel free to drop questions and comments as we go along. And even if you're rewatching this, we still track the comments. So would appreciate your questions and feedback on there, especially on LinkedIn and YouTube. But it's great to be here. My name is Dr. Lola Adeyemo, and I am the host of the Workplaces That Work conversation. I love hosting these spaces because I don't get to be the expert and have all the answers. I'm learning from all the experts. And Savio Clemente is my chat body today. We're going to be focused on decision making under high stake conditions, and I really love that because I think it's very relevant now. This conversation, workplaces that work, really started came out of a need, especially when we talk about organizations. Consultants that work directly with organizations or leaders within organization, and so sharing some of the case studies and stories of what we are doing within these companies to support the organizations to thrive successfully in the work that they do. And so I think a lot of the topics and the guests that I've had has been born out of their expertise and their experience. And so I primarily focus on employee resource group, workplace inclusion strategy, including employee resource groups and the community within workplace. So some companies call it ERGs, some call it BRGs, some have advisory or affinity circles, whatever you call it. How does your organization build community that works for the employees and also supports the business? That's the work that I do. So I do a lot of workshops that is tied to intersectionality and allyship. I do workshops on leading without authority. And I also do ERG optimization session, which is a big one now, especially for companies that have multiple ERGs spread out across different time zones and that are looking for ways to develop the leaders and also support the organization at a retention and employee engagement level. So if you have ERGs or you're thinking of launching ERGs, feel free to send me a message. Happy to share some resources and strategic guidance with you. Today, I'm going to let Savio also bring himself to the conversation and help you understand why I was excited to meet with him and bring him in for this specific conversation. So, Savio, if you want to introduce yourself and tell us about your career journey and then your work right now.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Lola, for having me on your show. I really appreciate it. Hi, everyone. My name is Savio P. Clemente. I'm a keynote and TEDx speaker, healthcare leadership strategist, a journalist, board certified health and wellness coach, best-selling author, and two-time cancer survivor. A title I never thought I would have, but I do. Fortunately, I'm living proof that you can overcome. My main focus in terms of my work and also my personal lived experiences, I speak with healthcare leaders to regain clarity and make high stakes decisions after disruption. As we all know, there's so much disruption in our world, socially, politically, and even technologically with AI. And so it's really, the premise is really the pressure hasn't gone quiet, it's just gone internal. And so for me, it's performance doesn't fail first, clarity does. And so that's my general thesis in everything that I do. At this point, I've interviewed over 2,000 leaders, thought leaders, experts, even celebrities. And for me, I've always found the kernel of truth is always trying to figure out for yourself, how does the human actually make those decisions? How does cognitive overload and cognitive repression to some degree affect our day-to-day work?
Yeah. Yeah, decision making. And I think that's as you said, very relevant right now, right? This is the leadership in stock. It doesn't matter if you're trying to be inclusive, if you're trying to make an informed, know what's going on. As a leader, you do have to make a decision. And that's a huge part of the responsibility. And so when the stakes, especially when the stakes are high. And so I think that's the context of this conversation. So maybe helping us understanding what high stakes decisions are is a good place to kind of level set this, Savio. How do
Yeah,
you
it's
define how do you define, like you personally, or describe what high stakes decisions are?
sure. So you can imagine with healthcare leaders, high stakes decision making is not only themselves and their team and their organization, it's another human being in front of them. I don't know if you're a fan of the show The Pit on HBO Max, but I love it. And to be honest with you, my nervous system is a wreck watching the show. It's on a hiatus right now. But it really shows the fact that these individuals who are taking care of other people are they themselves not taking care of themselves. And so for me, high stakes decisions are not really defined by urgency or visibility. They're defined what happens after decisions are made when the consequences begin to compound, not only for people and their trust and their resources, but also their strategy. And so the risk is really immediate in that sense.
Yeah. And well, is Pete similar to Grey's Anatomy?
I never watched the show Grey's Anatomy, but let me just say that the ER doctors that are watching that show all attest that this is true to form of how they experience their day to day.
Yeah.
And of course, we work in office settings, so it's not that serious or not that tragic because this isn't like saving someone's life. But when things are on the line, absolutely it is. When things are moving so fast, rapidly fast, when you're trying to juggle so many things in terms of getting the resources out, in terms of figuring out what the workflows are, it is high stakes. It feels high stakes because you're at risk for, with AI, for example, for your job to be replaced because AI, they say, can do it better. And I really have to push back on that. Can it really do it better? Yes, AI is definitely informative, but I don't think it can actually upend the work that we do, the actual human decisions that we actually make. There's a stat. I currently run a interview series with CEOs and CMOs right now called the Healthcare Leadership Operating System. And I was floored by one of the stats. One of the doctors actually mentioned that the US healthcare wastes about 735 to 935 billion dollars in healthcare waste. Now, is that just in equipment? No, that's in humans making decisions or poor decisions or ill decisions because they're not self-regulated. They're not actually focused on actually what's important. And they actually leave the human element out because all they want to do is actually optimize. And optimization is fantastic to some degree, but not always to a larger whole.
Yeah. You gotta fix things from the on the larger scale. And I think so maybe decision making under pressure. That's a key part of this, right? How do you think and again you're talking about this especially in healthcare, right? The stakes are higher. But in companies as well, that is also important. The stakes are high too, right? So let's talk about the under pressure part of decision making. How does cognitive load do you think how do you think it impacts like clarity and judgment for leaders when they have to do that?
Yeah. So pressure doesn't just affect outcomes, it really affects perception as to what performance will ultimately be. And sustained pressure and that cognitive load narrows the thinking. I can only bring my own lived experience. I mentioned earlier in the beginning that I'm a two-time cancer survivor. In 2014, I was diagnosed with stage 3 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. I was good for a decade. And then in June of 2024, I ended up getting a relapse. And I had to go through 16 months of treatment, including a stem cell transplant, 29 days in the hospital where I lost 26 pounds. One night I had to be rushed to the ICU to get norepinephrine because I had tachycardia. And I had to then go through an immunotherapy portion. And then I also went through 5 months of physical therapy. I tell you this story because at the end of the day, what is more, quote unquote, pressure filled than actually making decisions about one's mortality, or at least coming to terms with that? And so there are a few tools that I use that I think would actually help you, your audience, and also others who actually struggle with actually trying to figure out where they sit within the realm of what this whole human experience is all about. And so
Yeah.
for me, I use something called psychological distancing, which is part of psychological safety in general. Psychological safety, as you know, is really about trust. It's really about vulnerability within you and your teams, right? And so what I did is I decided, okay, I'm in a quarantine room in the hospital. How could I create a buffer between me and the situation that's actually happening, as opposed to actually being so caught up in the hopes and the wishes and the fears and the discomfort and the sadness? How can I actually create that? And I think if people actually take intentional silence and stillness, which is something that I also learned in such a precarious situation that I was in, you can actually take those steps to actually figure out for yourself, okay, all right, well, you know what is actually happening within me right now? What am I actually feeling? As a board certified health and wellness coach, not only is it really like talk therapy, it's really about how does that affect your human self? Like what's actually happening in an embodied way? What's happening in a somatic way to you when it comes to these decisions, when it comes to some type of crisis, when it comes to actually overcoming the crisis? Because my main point in all the work that I do is it's not about surviving the crisis, it's what comes after. That's when you're going to lose, because you have to recalibrate, you have to reorientate, and you have to figure out a new way forward.
Right. The post crisis. Post
Absolutely.
crisis. What? Okay. So maybe that's my next question for you. Will be what are some of the downsides you see when bad decisions have been made under pressure? Like, what are some of the things that maybe leaders go through after the decision has been made?
You know what? We're human. And so we're always scanning for threats. I don't know about you, but I'm always looking around me to see if I could be safe with someone or something, or unfortunately, somewhere in the United States right now, which is really hard.
Yes.
And I recognize I'm also someone of color. And I know that sometimes those things are not fully addressed or at least supported. And I realize that maybe, quote unquote, my little privilege, right, doesn't really equal to the amount of some others' privilege. But beyond all that, really is to really say that I think we need to actually have a better understanding as to what the wants and needs of other people are. And the way to do that is to figure out for yourself, what are your wants and needs? I think we often get blurred because we have to actually go and we have to actually figure out what the thesis or what the end result of said initiative at work is, right? And we focus just on that particular initiative and nothing else. But oftentimes, I often tell people, when it comes to leadership, it doesn't always have to be in a corporate setting. You know, you deal with ERGs, right? Obviously, there's a governing body, but leadership is about how you see yourself within that particular leader. What do you want to emulate? What do you want to mirror? That's what true leadership is. And I think the more that we actually figure out for ourselves, well, actually, who is operating the system? And this is part of also the discovery that I learned with my lived experience and also my healing journey, is the fact that when it comes to healing in general, or when it comes to actually figuring out or overcoming some hurdle or some problem, we have to first realize for ourselves, well, there's a term called metacognition. It's a little heady of a term, but it's really the thinking of the thinking. So in my example, I'm in a hospital bed tied to these machines. Every 4 hours, nurses come. There's doctors that are there. But who's actually operating? What consciousness is actually flowing through that separation of me and the thinking of the thinking? So it's a little heady, but I think it would help a lot of people to take that intentional silence and stillness in that frame and try to understand themselves better. Because the more that you actually are aligned, the more that actually alignment actually flourishes with you, your team, and the organization.
Yeah. We'll talk about some tips for ERGs in a little bit, but I wanted to dive into some of the tools that you use to work with leaders, healthcare leaders, leaders across different industries around building decision making um, capability. I guess I'll phrase it. So, can you share a little bit about some of your frameworks that you use to work with?
Sure. So I have a framework called the Adaptive Resilience Framework. It was born out of my professional leanings and also my lived experience as well, 2 times, which is really hard for me to actually say, but this is what life shows us, right? It gives us things, we have to work with it. And so the Adaptive Resilience Framework really is about understanding the signals, the patterns that life and situations and your work experience is actually thrusting upon you, right? When things seem overwhelmed, why is burnout such a big deal? Because people reach a limit and they themselves can't get themselves back. And so within that adaptive resilience framework, I have something called the Aloha Reboot. It's something that I actually echoed on a TEDx talk. I did a TEDx talk about 2 years prior to my cancer relapse in June of 2024. And in there, it's an acronym. And as we all know, aloha means hello in Hawaiian. And so I tell people it's 7 minutes, and my TEDx talk was called 7 Minutes to Wellness, How to Love Your Inner Stranger. And someone said, well, what do you mean an inner stranger? And I'm like, okay. I'm like, they're like, so what's your inner stranger? I'm like, my inner stranger is that young person that never felt totally grounded or rooted in like, I was friends with everybody, but I just never felt completely connected. And then they're like, oh, I see. So my inner stranger really is that professional idealized woman that I want to strive to be, but I can't, or that great mother or that great sibling that I want to be, that I can't. And so the acronym is very simple. A stands for acknowledge. So in my situation with that lived experience, is acknowledge what's happening. I'm in the hospital, doctors are coming, I'm going to probably be here for a month. There's beeps, quarantine room, just acknowledge what's actually happening. So in your situation or organization or in your team, just acknowledge it, just be truthful with that. L stands for listening. So listen to your inner self. In Hawaiian, there's a healing modality called huna healing. And I know this might be a little woo-woo, but I have to say it because there's a lot of sort of great ancient information that is relevant to modern times. And so the healers, the kahunas in Hawaiian modality of huna healing, believe that the body not only sends us sensations, but actually has language, has consciousness, has actually something to tell us. And so we have to be silent and still to learn from that. O stands for opening. So open yourself up to this information. You're only exploring yourself regardless of your belief systems. H stands for harnessing. So harness that information, see what works, what doesn't work, make the mental connections, because not everything's going to work. And A stands for acting. So it's called aloha, but there's a caveat with acting. So you have to have courage to act. And there's a lot of data that supports, people often say to me, I want to change, but I can't. And the data actually points to the fact that it's called the models of change, that it's not that people don't want to change. People don't know how to change. They don't know if they're actually thinking about change, pre-contemplation, in change. They're actually in change, wanting to relapse. So it's really about supporting yourself in that change. So you have to have the courage in order to act. And so it's called the Aloha Reboot, 7 minutes. Someone told me once they don't have 7 minutes in their day. I said, just break it down and do 1 minute, one of the acronyms per day. And after 5 days, you have the Aloha.
I love it. I love how you make it memorable, meaningful, impactful, because I think sometimes, as you said, knowing you are supposed to do something, if we all did all the things we're supposed to do, I mean, it's like, I know I'm supposed to work out more. I know I'm supposed to sleep more. I know I'm supposed to.
Yeah.
The how do I go about it? And I think the giving something actionable in a very short time frame for leaders who are navigating high stakes decisions every single day with their teams, with their customers, right? Within their systems. It's really important to know what to do or know a path to follow to guide you through the decision making.
Yeah. And I also have to add another point. I think often people get confused because they are trying to, once again, focus on performance or optimize something or recover something. And sometimes the beauty is actually in just the present. The beauty is actually in trying to just figure out what's actually happening right now, as opposed to what should be happening, what could be happening, what may be happening. And I think we all get caught up in that. And so it's really about taking that intentional pause for yourself.
Yeah, I like that. And that, yeah, the acknowledge part is a good place to start. Acknowledge the
Well,
reality. Let's not pretend. Let's not pretend this is not happening. Let's not pretend there's no medical emergency and shutdown in the world. Let me just keep living as if people are not
let's
dying.
let's not pretend that DEI initiatives are ending. I mean, let's
Yeah,
not. I mean,
I
this is
mean, let's go there.
let's just be truthful. Let's be
Let's
truthful.
be truthful.
But just because it's happening doesn't mean we have to accept it. And just
Right.
because it's happening doesn't mean that we can't do something about it. And I think that's where apathy comes into play, which is really dangerous. Someone recently asked me, they're like, you've been through so much and all that. They're like, what's your philosophy right now? And I'm like, if I had to bring it all down, I would say, and I think this is really helpful for anyone, is that I'm not too attached to a lot. But Lola, to be honest with you, I also know the dangers of being too detached. So I live in that middle ground of possibility, that middle ground of adventure. And I think when we actually look at life through that lens, I think it actually supports us because, oftentimes, I don't know about you, but I know for me, I get sort of fractured. And I used to actually wrestle with this because, you in the beginning, I named a whole bunch of stuff that my background is, right? That's all my credentials. Yeah. Does that really define me as a person? Not really. But what I would do is I would walk into situations like right now, I'm with you on your show. And I would say, okay, I'm Savio, the one who's doing a podcast right now. And I realized that I was actually fragmenting myself. Rather, what I've learned is I'm entering today's door right now with you doing a podcast. So I'm my whole self and not fragmented. And people often confuse that because they often say, well, my job is soul sucking and I can't. And I'm like, well, why can't it be soul searching? Why can't you find the pockets of things that light you up? Why can't you actually create instances, create mechanisms, create frameworks, whatever the case may be, in order to actually lighten that load so you don't feel as heavy, you don't feel as burned out, you don't feel as disconnected.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think not to be dismissive of real legitimate concerns that people have. I think it's just to also acknowledge the how this is the outcome I'm looking for. I don't know how to get from here to there. And I was having a recent conversation with someone who was just in a negative space and complaining about the reality. And again, not being dismissive, but also, okay, acknowledge everything, put all the cards out. We're not pretending that this is not happening to you right now,
Mhm.
but we're trying to find the path through it. All right. Like, what can we do? And I'm not even a coach, but I was just like, I just I just like to help people like calm down. Let's acknowledge what's going on and let's find a path through it in a very thoughtful way. But it was a casual conversation. But I think a lot of times that's where people kind of shut down. It's like
Yeah,
talking about all of the things
yeah,
that are wrong and
yeah,
are negative.
yeah,
That itself is not, that cognitive load is the way you describe it and you talk about that. That itself is not healthy and it's not productive.
yeah. But I'll give you a tip if you're ever run across that friend again who has that issue or problem. Ask them. Ask them when in their life have they ever encountered maybe not the similar situation or circumstance, but a similar
Mhm.
feeling. When have they encountered that?
Exactly.
And I'm sure they have. How have they navigated through that? Because
Yeah.
that will allow them to resource what they
That could be
actually
something.
did.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. When was the last time you felt like this? How did you get through it? Yeah. Give them something positive to hold on to.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's definitely part of all the healthcare crises that we are having now. Mental health, wellness. There is a lot of stuff that people are navigating. There's a lot of stuff they're doing, and I think um, being a leader of a team of an organization in this day, I mean, I try to put myself in their shoes, and also, I know sometimes we beat leaders up when we talk about things, from like the employee perspective.
Mhm.
But it's also being the gap translator for some of these conversations. So I work with a lot of employee resource group leaders, a lot of the people at the director level that have like executive reporting structure, but they're also responsible for seeing what the people need. So they're in this middle point where you know, it's easy to like talk about a leader as somebody who doesn't get it, but it's also sometimes we need to like pull back and look at the view that this leader has and all of the things that is coming at them and the decisions that they have to make. And so maybe one of the questions I was going to tie to like ERGs, which I like to do on here because I do have a lot of ERGs listening, is what about when you don't have authority? We could talk about a scenario where you don't really feel like you have the power to do anything. But I think employee resource group leaders also kind of get stuck in this space sometimes where there's a lot going on. I mean, you have the title ERG leader, but do you really have authority to do anything? And then you kind of feel like, well, I'm not a leader, because what you're trying to say is I'm not an executive at my company. I am not a people manager. And so there is nothing I can do. And you feel overwhelmed. What what should what are some of the things they could do in that kind of situation, and maybe some advice for leaders who have that kind of in between role?
Well, a lot of this, the undercurrent is what? Uncertainty, right? It's really about how do you actually navigate and actually figure out what's actually happening within an organization, a said organization. How do you build trust once again? How do you build psychological safety, which includes vulnerability as well? How do you actually allow those points to surface and actually have a dialogue about it, and how you stabilize from that? I think what's really interesting, and I wanted to ask you this question because it's going to inform my next response. It's so interesting because it always was employer, employee, and now there's a third person, AI, who has its own domain. And a lot of people are giving it so much authority. Actually, they're giving it blatant authority. And so I wanted to actually ask you, how was that even influencing what you actually see in the front lines with that?
Well, the role AI is playing in the space right now. Well, I think a part of it is the cognitive load is increasing, because we have access to way more information than we did then, right? I mean, if you're in corporate America, there's not a lot of data that you have access to. You have access to what your leaders tell you, or you used to have access to what your leaders tell you. So I think with AI now, there's so much data that everyone has access to. And you could go down the rabbit hole with everything. You could like research what other companies are doing, or what everyone else is getting, or what looks shiny and nice everywhere else. So leaders have the same information, right? And so maybe instead of us to communicate more, to understand our own reality more, now we're taking all this information from the larger world, which might be very different for your own people. Instead of connecting with people and actually knowing what's going on, we've built this wall of information about us, around ourselves, around different topics and themes. And so pros and cons, right? Having information at our fingertip, but then what does that do to us actually doing something about it?
Yeah, because I feel to a large degree the discussion around that, and this goes back to clarity. This is my central thesis. Performance doesn't fail first, clarity does. And I think that we're giving AI such autonomy, like as if it's its own entity. And yes, it can think, but it's to some degree, they actually say it's still in its beginning stages. And so when you deal with having to deal with employees and their needs and their wants, and then having a DEI sort of lens around that, having this idea of belonging, how do you actually balance and navigate that? And I think once again, it's really important. And I tell people all the time that we are not lacking in a content. We don't have a content problem at all. We have a connection problem. And the connection is with ourselves as humans, but also the connection to something that a lot of people fear, a lot of people don't understand, a lot of people are, as one of my cohorts mentioned, that she has a lot of guilt with using AI, which I think if you're using the word guilt for anything in life, you have to, as Yoda would say, search your feelings on that and actually figure out why you actually use such a word, such a sensitive word like that.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important when you talk about ERGs is really to have everyone feel like they're included in the conversation, to not only be seen, but to also feel a level of belonging. And some people would sort of shy at that and say, well, that's not possible in a work setting. And I don't believe that that's true. I believe you actually can. And obviously it always starts from the top level, but you can also create those pockets within said organization. So what I would tell your ERG leaders, or the discussion around it, is really to help stabilize that conversation, is to actually give voice to it, to actually name things. I'm a huge proponent in naming things, not naming things for identity, because then people then fall into this trap of saying that they are just that. But naming it allows the power to be diffused to some level. You actually give it an objective view rather than a subjective one. And so by doing that, you actually say, okay, well, this is what's happening. And so therefore, I'm going to take the necessary steps in order to figure it out. And just my own proclivity is I actually love doing reverse engineering. That's just like, it's just actually taking a piece of paper and actually going and seeing how can I actually trace the steps back to said problem, you know, in order to figure out the solutions for it.
Yeah, I love that. Well, AI comes up in a lot of conversations I have every day now, but when I think of decision making, I definitely think when you take the human side of it, you lose the benefit of what exactly this is supposed to be, a complementary tool to humans. Because I'm in this phase of example business. I'm reviewing my systems, and so I was using AI to do this, and I felt like the AI was pointing me towards a certain tool. I was using AI for this research. And then I asked a different question after I tested this tool because I didn't really like it. It's like, no, no, gave it more parameters to take out. Like, Scout, I want you to find me. No, this is my goal. This is what I really want. Like, oh, this one is great, but it's too heavy. That's not what I'm really looking for. And I'm like, the information overload, the data overload, how to translate it into something useful is really how we ask the right question. And sometimes asking a human is like the most direct way we could go about it.
And also, it's not always about something that's fast.
Right.
We don't need to get an answer within 3 seconds. We just need to get a relevant answer that actually makes sense, that actually improves the situation, not 7 different things that's giving. And look, I'm a huge proponent of AI, but I see it, like you said, as a tool. It's just a tool. And I can use my human autonomy to actually choose whether or not I want to engage in whatever way I want to engage it with.
Exactly. There's an AI for everything these days. So, but you need to use 10 AI things. You could need just one. Depends on what you're doing and what you're trying to solve and what you're trying to eliminate. So, as we close out, I guess my final question would just be something to take away for people listening. What's one shift that you think leaders, within healthcare, within organizations, can make in order to improve the quality of their decision making, especially when it's under pressure? With every decision making, it sounds like it's under pressure.
Yeah, Lola, I can tell you all the things that all the gurus, TikTok influencers, all the experts will tell you, which is basically be present, be authentic, right? How can you be present and more authentic? You can put your feet on the ground. What I do is I'm a long-time meditator, meditate in the morning. I do about 20 minutes. You could do prayer, journaling, breathing exercises, humming. I could say all that to you, but really at the end of the day, it's really taking that intentional silence. It's not even a pause. It's taking that intentional silence in whatever factor, because the more regulated you are, and how do you get self-regulated? I mentioned a couple of things, right? But the way that the energy, the joy, the enthusiasm that you generate on a daily basis has to come from some source. Most of us get it through sleep. But if you take actually that intentional silence within yourself and you actually figure out for yourself who's actually running this particular operating system of mine, who's actually figuring out what are the next steps? Is it me, the person that's actually doing the day-to-day tasks and figuring out the responsibilities? Or is it some larger force, whatever your belief system, it doesn't really matter. Is there a larger force actually that's supporting that and dictating that? And so I can't give you that answer. That answer has to be found from within. But I think it's very, very important, because somehow we made work such a high priority that to a large degree, and we've had a lot of things to contend with. I mean, COVID, political strife, you name it. But at the end of the day, I think people get lost in the fact that they have to produce, they have to perform, rather than actually resourcing and figuring out who's actually wanting that, who's actually needing that, what is the end result of that. And so this might be considered philosophical, but I'm trying to be as balanced with this as possible.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, thanks for the work you do. And so glad, you're doing well with your health and turning that also into insights and tools to continue to help others. And so for those that are listening, um, connect with myself, connect with Savio, and let us know if you have follow-up questions. If you're somebody that is navigating high-stake situations right now, personally, professionally, with your teams, with the work, which I feel like everybody is doing that. Do you do that every day? That's
Yeah,
what
because you know what? I was thinking about this, you were so fantastic with giving me an outline. And part of me was like, do I just go all data with her and her audience? Do I just rattle off of a few things that AI could do, or some Instagram or TikTok influencer
I
could
knew
do?
you were not going to do
I'm
that because
like
you bring
I'm
so
like
much already
I'm like,
from your
oh
business.
no, I'm gonna bring in the human. I'm gonna bring
Yes,
things that
I love it.
stick. And so for me, even when I do my own keynotes, I tell people it's great if you call me motivational, inspirational, that's great. But the data points to that only lasts a certain amount of time. What I
Yeah.
would rather say that I am is a sticky speaker. I
Mm,
want what I say to actually stick. And I want what I say not only to stick, but to actually inform your next steps.
next step. Absolutely. I love it. Thank you. Thank you so much for chatting with me today, Savio. It's been great getting to hear your thoughts around this very important topic. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you so much, Lola.